Friends, welcome back. Thanks for joining us as we continue our entry into the Gospel of Luke, still making our way through the first chapter, though I'm not sure we said on the outset, Michael, Luke, one of the things Luke is known for among the Gospels is long chapters. Yeah. Luke does put a lot into some of these chapters. But as we continue today, really in some ways we get to the heart of the story we know. Luke is one of the two Gospels that gives us some of what we consider our Christmas stories. And we get in Luke a kind of a preview or a precursor to that. And so let me read a few verses here, and then we'll come back and talk about them. This is starting with verse 26. In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a town in Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin engaged to a man whose name was Joseph, of the house of David. The virgin's name was Mary, and he came to her and said, "Greetings, favored one, the Lord is with you." But she was perplexed by his words and pondered what kind of greeting this might be. And the angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God, and now you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you will name him Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give him the throne of his ancestor David. He will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and all his kingdoms will have no end." I think we can stop there, Michael. That's good. So here we get, for the second passage in a row, a kind of a divine appearance. The angel Gabriel, in both cases, shows up with a pronouncement. The last time was a priest in the temple. Here we have a young girl, a young woman, Mary, presumably in her home. She's at least in her hometown. There is some historic, what would you say, Michael? There's some historic bantering, I guess, about the word virgin here. The original Hebrew that is quoted is the Hebrew word for a young woman or a young maiden. When it gets translated into Greek, the Greek translators chose a word in Greek specifically that means virgin. There have been times that people have argued about that translation, which, to be honest, I think is overkill, because even if you wanted to argue that it doesn't specifically say virgin in the Old Testament, the implication of a young unmarried woman in the Hebrew culture is 100%. So I think it's kind of a false flag argument, but it for whatever reason, Michael, it has been a place that people have squabbled over in this text. And I don't know if it remains so. When I was in seminary, there were even books and papers and articles written about how you translate this word, and I'm not sure that I ever really got it.
I think that it's a classic example of when theology goes looking for a particular question in the gospel narratives. I mean, sometimes our questions are really interesting and generative, but not exactly what the writers were intending to address right off the bat. And I think that this is an example of that. We have in Christian theology this idea, specifically in the Catholic tradition, you have a lot of that talk about the perpetual virginity of Mary, not to get really complicated, but there's this whole language of sin's relation to how we're born and how we're conceived, and there's all this kind of natural theology kind of stuff. That is not a place we're going to go. But my point that I want to make here is, Clint, what's striking is that we might get fixated on a word and its translation and miss what's very clearly the connection to the text that came before, and that is that here we have a messenger from God, by the way, explicitly named Gabriel, so the same exact messenger who goes to Zechariah is the exact messenger who now appears before Mary. And here we get to see how now this explicitly young woman, this woman who is not married, is going to now be spoken to and told about this miraculous event that's going to happen. And we, the reader, have been very carefully and intentionally put into the position of asking ourselves, how is she going to respond? What is she going to do? Is it going to be similar to what Zechariah did, or is it going to be different? And Clint, when we get fixated on a particular slice of the text, and by the way, we do this in so many different places in Scripture. It's not just an area like this. We do this in the Pauline letters, but when we do that, we often fail to actually hear the word of the book writer. And I think here, if we're willing to put aside some of those historical, theological concerns for a moment, we might hear that very pressing, well-crafted word.
Yeah. If you ever run into that, I think on the whole, most of us would say that it is a little bit of much ado about nothing. More significant here, we have this greeting. Greetings, favored one, which is a compelling and, to my knowledge, unique greeting in the Bible. I don't know of another time that the phrase is used in that way. The Lord is with you. And then Mary's response is so important in the Gospel of Luke. She was perplexed and pondered. And particularly in the Christmas story, in the origin story of Jesus, we are going to see words like this. People trying to understand what this means. People confused. People confounded. People trying to understand at some level what they're hearing, what they're seeing, what it means. And so Luke introduces us here to some really important themes. What kind of greetings might this be? And then we get, again, that standard words. We see it, we hear it said to essentially every character in the first two chapters of Luke. Do not be afraid. You found favor with God. You will conceive. He will be great. He will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his ancestor David. This, without using the word Messiah, this is the proclamation of the promise. He will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end. So, again, Luke, without giving us chapter and verse, without saying Isaiah said or Jeremiah said, as Matthew might be inclined to do, Luke has completely tied this story to the Israelite story, to the Old Testament story, to the covenant story in which God had promised a deliverer. And now this young woman, probably we think somewhere in the 16-year-old range, give or take, is being met with this angelic pronouncement that she will be the one to bring this forth, that she will be the vessel, that she will be the one used by God to deliver the one that Israel has been waiting for and looking for. This is a profound moment, and it's familiar to us, so perhaps we miss it, but this is a stunning part of the story.
There's an interesting contrast here as well, Clint, because Protestants, specifically Presbyterians, as we're part of, have tended to shy away from. We're pretty nervous about the emphasis of Mary. In the Catholic Church, just today in the pre-Bible study, we were looking at, a beautiful sculpture of Mary. You're not going to find that in a Protestant, specifically Presbyterian congregation, because there's real skepticism about the temptation to put anyone in between Jesus Christ and those that he came to save. And Mary's on that list for Presbyterians. But I think one thing that we need to pause and reflect upon here for just a moment is this language that comes, you have found favor with God. Like you said, Clint, there is a unique address in this, and it is worth noting that there is a kind of gift that's been bestowed upon this young woman. And that is surprising. It's surprising to the original reader. It's surprising in its original culture. It's surprising even today that God would choose to work through the life of a humble young woman who lives in a no-name place. I mean, not only is she not married and not in the right season of life for her to be bearing children in her culture, she's also living in a place that's not on the map, that doesn't matter in scare quotes to the people of Israel, to the national religion, all of these things. And yet it is to this young woman who this address is given. And it's another example, Clint, of the young woman, the least, the one who's put down at the lowest rung, how she in some ways, this is going to push her lower, and that's an interesting facet of the story in terms of the culture. But yet she's been found favored. She's been found faithful. She's the one that's been chosen for this gift. And Luke wants us to know that not only is she struck by the weight of that, she's perplexed, she ponders, but Luke also wants us to know that this young woman is full of faith and willing to respond in the positive to that. And I think that that is one of the things that should be inspiring about Mary. Mary should be a person that young women, my daughters could look up to as someone who was given a gift and responded with thanksgiving, responded with gratitude. That is an inspiring story, and it's one that's told well here.
Yeah, you're right, Michael, and I was thinking the same thing. We have a little bit of an aversion to lifting Mary. Our denominational history makes us reluctant to over-celebrate the role of Mary in the story. But if we could separate ourselves from that a little bit, presumably God had the freedom, there's no reason to question that God had the freedom to select whoever God would have wanted to choose for this role. Any Jewish woman, we've just seen Elizabeth, who wasn't able to bear a child, is going to bear a child. So there are literally no limitations to how God could have done this. And yet, of all of those potential people, of all of those potential participants, God chooses Mary. And that's not for nothing. I do think maybe our hesitation, given our history with the Catholic denomination and the Protestant denomination and the break and separation that happens, sometimes maybe we don't give Mary quite enough due because of that history. And I think it is worth noting that for whatever reasons, and we don't get told many of them, God thought Mary to be the right person to do this thing, to literally partner with and produce the Messiah, to deliver the Messiah, if not produce. And so this is a stunning moment, and it does certainly say something about Mary that none other than God himself chooses her, and the angel Gabriel calls her favored one.
And I think that this text is important, not just for what it says, but what it doesn't say. And you alluded to this, Clint. I'm looking at verse 30, because when the angel says, "Don't be afraid, you found favor with God," it does not say why. It does not say why she's found favor with God. And that, I think, is critical, and it's beautiful, because we, the reader, don't need to know. It's none of our business. It's not for us to compare ourselves to Mary. It's not to see, well, did she actually deserve it? This is God's choice. This is God's prerogative, Clint. And we, as the reader, are simply looking over the shoulder. We're hearing the conversation. And in this conversation, we're hearing she's been favored.
It's almost as if, Michael, that the invitation itself validates Mary's qualifications, because even a chapter ago it told us Zechariah and Elizabeth were blameless and righteous. It is simply assumed that Mary is worthy of this task. Just the very fact that she's selected seems to validate her own standing. You have found favor with God, and in the presence of Gabriel, with the promise of the Messiah, that's all that need be said. There's nothing. It's a good catch to point that out. There's nothing that needs to be added to that. That's enough.
If any one of our 16-year-old children responds in the way that Mary does, with thoughtfulness, with gratitude, even in the midst of what is clear some surprise, right? If that was the case, any parent would be shocked, amazed, thrilled, over the moon, all of it at the same time, maybe afraid with their child. But what we find here is that when God reveals the plan to these significant people, not everyone responds the same. And Mary's response here, coming after Zacharias, coming after Elizabeth, is now given some context. If we had begun with Mary, the reader might just think, oh, yeah, of course that's what you do when God tells you he's going to make you a part of the salvation of all humanity, right? You got picked, you won the lottery. But I think when we have the selection that's come before it, we have some context to remind ourselves, no, it's not that simple. That ultimately this is by what she says and doesn't say, an astonishing act of faith and trust in God. And that is something to be celebrated.
It's interesting, and I don't know if I've thought about it this way before, Michael, but in the Luke story, we've already been told Zechariah was terrified when the angel appeared. When they make the announcements to the shepherds are going to be terrified. In Matthew, Joseph is afraid. It's interesting that though Mary is told, don't be afraid, we're never told that she is. I think, that's a curiosity I've not noticed, and I wonder if Luke is doing that intentionally, if that shares something with us or not. But this is an obviously profound moment, historically, biblically, covenantally. Should also just point out that we are told here in the 6th month, there has been a school of thought that would put Jesus' birth somewhere around March. There's speculation on every detail you can think of in the Bible. Somebody has wondered what it means and if it means something. If we assume that the calendars are relatively similar, that's possible that's telling us that. It's also possible that that's a reference we don't fully understand. And so it's never gotten a lot of traction. Obviously, we celebrate Jesus' birth in December, though not because we think that's when it happened, just because that's when we do it. But here, just so you know, when we encounter these things, there has been conversation about, does this tell us something about the actual date of Jesus' birth? And we're not sure that it does, but some think it might.
Yeah, just in case that's news to you, like Clint's saying, the day that we celebrate Christmas wasn't selected because of a historical, critical reason that it was trying to nail down the actual date of his birth, but rather related to other traditions and other church calendar and even not church-related calendar things. So all that said,
the length of days, light coming back into the winter. Yeah, right. There's lots of history in that. If you're interested, talk to us or just Google why is Christmas in December. You'll get lots of stuff. Be careful with some of it.
That wouldn't be the right note, I think, to end the conversation on. I think the right note to end the conversation on is simply to say that at the end of the day, Mary has no clue what this journey is going to look like. She doesn't really even know what the next step of that journey is. But what we do know is she's been found favored. And I think that the invitation to all of us is to seek to live our own lives in such a way that if that angel appeared before us, we too might be found as those who are prepared to be faithful, those who are ready to say, yes, Lord. And I think that your point is well said. Now, it's going to linger with me, Clint, that it's unlikely Mary got there day one. It's unlikely that Mary's the one who's told that she's been highly favored because she woke up that morning on the good side of the bed. This is clearly a person who's been found to be faithful, a person who has been found favored. And I think that is a inspiring invitation for all of us to live our own lives of faith in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, that could have very deep roots, Michael. This is a covenant promise, generations in the making. And we have generally conceded in the Reformed faith that God didn't just come up with the idea, that the intention was always to send the incarnate Son, which meant that God's intention was probably also, and there's that likely always involved a partnership with a human being. And the fact that Mary is chosen either then or now or whenever, is a testament to her and of a very fascinating reflection on the mysterious work of God. Pondered and perplexed. There's be ample opportunities for those words.
Yeah, if you're uncomfortable with Mary because you've grown up Protestant, then transform this story for just a moment in your imagination and allow it to be a story of invitation into God's own work in your own life. I mean, you're not going to bear in the way that Mary is, but we are called to bear the gospel, for it to bear fruit in us. And here's a character who Luke shows us clearly is doing that with a great deal of faith.
Yeah, I don't want to overdo it, Michael, but sometimes our theological worries are just not a big concern for the text.
Right.
That whether we're sensitive to giving Mary too much credit or what has happened in the past. Luke doesn't care about any of that. Luke is trying to tell us the story of how the Messiah came into the world and what it means for the world that he did, and we just have to sort of deal with it.
It's well said. Thanks for being with us, friends. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Until then, be blessed.
Thanks, everybody.